Okay, wonderful. So, Tom, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule ahead of the election to join me in this conversation. The idea is to help our candidates to get to be better known by the community. So, I did recently create a channel called The Globe on Canada. I'm kind of a little bit intended here, so that I can actually reach out to the people who are thinking alike, people who are members of the PPC, and overall free-thinking Canadians, and talk to them and see what's their position on what's going on inside Canada as well as globally. You know that a liberal government called a snap election, which puts many of the candidates of the upstart parties, like the People's Party of Canada, a bit of the disadvantage. So the goal here is to understand, who are the candidates, their background, what they stand for, and also go over some of the big issues that every Canadian is thinking about right now. So maybe we can start with a bit on your background and how did you come into politics and what you stand for.
Yeah, sure, Konstantin, and thank you. I know we just recently met this morning by email, yes. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your channel. And I think you're doing a great thing for Canadians launching such a channel. I wouldn't say the PPC party is an upstart party, though. When you think of upstarts, you think of a party kind of emerging or coming out of nowhere to deal with an issue that nobody's dealt with. I don't think the PPC is an upstart party. I think they're a party that is sort of hearkening back to the traditional values of Canada, a few decades ago. And what's happened is really the upstart and the radical parties are more of the mainstream parties now, whereas the PPC is more of the standard traditional choice. So I don't know if the term upstart is the one I would apply. The PPC is really a principled party dedicated to Canada and Canadians. And that used to be all the parties at one time. It's just not anymore. So, upstart, sure, I guess you could call it that because we tend to think of something's new, that they're somehow new and bringing in new ideas. But actually, the PPC isn't a lot of new ideas. It's a lot of just ideas that they seem new because the mainstream parties have moved away and neglected them for so long. That said, my background, and as you can tell, I tend to be very, quickly to state my opinions. So I am definitely a very diversity candidate, not because of the color of my skin, but because of the life I've led. So I grew up in the district that I'm running in an area district called Delton. I, grew up in the 70s, and back then, things were very different than they are today. I ended up in my life going to university, studying physics and mathematics, became a teacher of math and physics at a technical institute. I then lived overseas for 12 years where I was very entrepreneurial. I owned a bicycle shop. I was a professional photographer. I owned a guest house. I learned to speak an Asian language. I worked for multinational companies, taught at universities, and even at an elementary school where I taught English, which was actually a lot of fun. And I came back to Canada, brought my kids, got thrust into the family law system, which was an experience we might talk about a little bit later because it's a platform policy that's near and dear to me that the PPC is not yet adapted as a party policy, but is definitely on my own platform. And I've done a lot. I've been an adjunct professor. I worked for several multinationals in the aerospace and electronics and automotive industries, as well as pharmaceuticals, senior management typically. And I was homeless for a little while during one brief period. And I went from that to having a house with a swimming pool when I was a senior manager. So I've been a student, a professor, a teacher at all grade levels. And my work brings me into contact with people of all types, all ilks, all kinds of ideas and professions. And yeah, so I think diversity, I'm very, very diverse. I can definitely mix and mingle with people of almost any level, from senior managers to people living on the street. And because I've shared life experience, right? And that's what makes diversity, not the color of your skin. Just because a party puts forward a candidate with a skin color, I don't think they can truly make the claim of diversity. The electors have to look for, does that person actually have a life, or has part of their life been in a place where I can relate to that person and that person can relate to me?
This is amazing, to be honest with you. I I worked with thousands of people, internationally. I work, in South America, in the US and Canada, obviously, in Europe and Asia, because of my career in IT, and I was doing this for 25 years. And I met a lot of diverse people, but nobody as diverse as you in terms of the backgrounds.
Oh yeah, but that has a drawback. My resume is a mess.
I know, when I write my resume and I condense it, it comes out like 8 pages. I think this is, you had probably already a little bit too much experience, So in any case, I do appreciate this. I think for many people, it's going to be interesting to learn that, people like yourself actually become active in politics and share values with PPC. Also, let's talk about the next topic. And next topic is the lockdown in Alberta. And again, Albertan government, kind of to many people's surprise, a couple of months ago, they said, okay, coronavirus, we'll have to live with it. Let's go ahead and just simply treat it as like any other disease. And they have lessened some of the restrictions. And yet they're coming back again with this lockdowns and other restrictions. What do you think? What's going on there in Alberta?
Oh gosh, where to begin? Yeah, I'm very disappointed. I really thought that Kenny and our premier and our provincial government was kind of coming back to pragmatic thinking. The general consensus for anybody who thinks critically and is capable of analyzing this is that the science does not support lockdowns and extreme mandates. The death rates and stuff are just not justifiable. I mean, we had no issue sacrificing millions of lives for freedom and stuff a few decades ago, and we understood that's the price you paid. And now we literally have a society where like a single life is not worth risking, and we'll give up freedoms for it. And of course, the flip side of this and the ridiculous of it is that the lockdowns and stuff have resulted in catastrophic costs that may even exceed the cost of the deaths by COVID. We've seen suicide rates increase, depression, divorces, there was a recent study out of the UK that showed that children who went through the lockdown have been delayed in their cognitive development. And that's a lifetime thing. Like, you slow down somebody's cognitive development, and that's really hard to recover later on. So giving up things like that for something that has a mortality rate of, I don't even know what the latest statistic is. It's getting so hard to find stuff, but it's less than 1%. And even then, there has to be comorbidity issues usually. It just doesn't justify it. So when Kenny came out and said, yeah, we're just going to live with this and go on and, keep our economy going and stuff, I thought finally, some leadership, some balls to do what's right. And then he backtracks on it. I've got a bit of a theory about this. One of the things that we have in Canadian politics that may not be good, and you experience the same thing in the US, is that we have a federal progressive conservative party and we have a provincial conservative party. And those parties, I think, tend to collude, especially at an election time. So what I suspect, and this is just a suspicion, I have nothing to back it up, but I suspect probably that Mr. O'Toole, he flip-flopped too. He was going to be against vaccine mandates and stuff, and he flip-flops the same. And by the way, you never trust anybody who flip-flops. That's a life lesson, that sooner you learn it in life, the better. Sorry, I digressed, but I suspect Mr. O'Toole got in touch with Mr. Kenny and probably said something like, hey, we're going to come out in favor of vaccine mandates. And so, you're saying that you're going to stay away from them, may be politically harmful to us federally, and so Kenny, maybe that's the reason that he flip-flopped on this. I don't know. I mean, he's saying it's because of the numbers, but the numbers don't make sense. When they told us first it was to flatten the curve, then they told us it was to wait until we got to herd immunity, which would be about 70% vaccinated. Now we're at 70% vaccinated, and that's still not good enough. They're just moving the goalposts over and over. So I think this is maybe one of the strengths of the PPC party is we don't have a provincial equivalent. And honestly, if Maxime Bernier and the party wanted to talk about provincial equivalents, I would probably say no. I think it's good if the national party and the provincial parties are a little bit at odds. National interests and provincial interests, of course they overlap, but they're also kind of separate. And one of the things the PPC party is advocating is more autonomy to the provinces, to provincial governments. And that little push-pull that we get is one of the foundations of good democracy. The United States was built on that, right? It was acknowledged by the founding fathers, I believe, that they wanted the Senate, the Congress, the Supreme Court to always be sort of, able to check each other. Isn't that correct?
That's right. Yes, that was
Yeah.
the idea. You have the lower chamber of parliament, and of course we have the higher one, and that's for the checking purposes. That meaning that if a particular body is taken over by one party and they try to push it through, in this case we have the Senate, for instance, to stop the law or stop the project from becoming a law. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think it's a good thing that the PPC party is focused just on national interests, and we don't have a provincial counterpart to collude with. And I think that's one of the things that the mainstream parties like the Liberals, the NDPs, and the CPCs do. They can collude with their provincial equivalents, and I don't think that's a good thing for democracy or Canadians. But overall, I was surprised and disappointed, and the way they did it was so dramatic. Your phone goes beep beep beep. Emergency alert. So much drama to it. When you pick this up and you're thinking like, God, maybe there's a nuclear war coming, or air raids or something, and you pick it up and it's like, we're just gonna, we're gonna introduce more lockdown mandates, beginning at midnight. And
it's like on my phone. On my phone, I'll mention this. It's middle of July, 24 degrees Celsius outside, and I get notification on my phone: climate change, heat wave warning. Come on, it's July, 24 degrees. Yes. And then I realized where it came from. It came from Environment Canada, as a matter of fact, because I live close to Canada. So actually, I'm getting the messages because of my geographic location. So the Environment Canada sends me a message, climate change, heat wave warning, 24 degrees in July.
Yeah, and this is something that surprises me about people nowadays, is people don't seem to understand the slippery slope concept. The idea that it begins with one thing, and then they just push more and more and more on you once they feel that you can adapt to or accept certain, changes or restrictions in your freedom. So I know Justin Trudeau gave a talk, and I can't remember the exact quote, but he more or less said something like, the way we've learned to deal with COVID, we can apply these same tools and these same ideas and techniques to dealing with climate change. And that's a terrifying statement, because now it means like, okay, he's obviously seen that people will tolerate a lot under, the emergency of, the so-called emergency of COVID. And then, what's he learned from this that he wants to use for climate change? And I worry that we may see more repressive ideas, more freedom restricting legislation and emergency edicts from any government in power.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
Looks
now,
like it. Yeah, this COVID thing is more of a trial ball, to be honest with you. And now, and this is actually going for them quite well, even though I have to say that the situation is beginning to change. We see more and more resistance, more and more people are beginning to wake up and actually realize what's going on, but still not in the large enough numbers to stop it in its tracks. That's my assessment. Not yet.
Well, if you grew up in Canada, I mean, I'm already disappointed. I think, in Canada, we grow up with freedom, around us all the time. And maybe we've just become complacent, I guess. We're not learning enough history in school, maybe. Maybe our parents aren't teaching us enough that freedom is something that is hard earned and easily lost. And that every generation that sacrifices to give it to you is not just passing you the privilege of freedom, but they're passing you an obligation to continue it for your children. And that sense of obligation seems to have disappeared. Not just like, it's certainly disappeared with politicians. I mean, certainly the idea of continually running deficit budgets and passing debt to your children obviously shows a lack of care or concern for the generations to come. That's on just a scale that I can't comprehend and explain. But it also shows up even in our society today, that people don't understand that, you give up freedom and it's very, very hard to win it back.
I completely agree with you. As somebody who grew up not in Canada, I grew up in the USSR. And actually, as a young man, I made a conscious decision to escape the Soviet system. With the rest of my life, I did that. Eventually, I ended up in Canada as an independent immigrant. But this is a big step that I made back in the late 80s, etc., realizing all the risks. So the reason I chose Canada, because it showed to be actually more free than any other nation that I knew. And of course, now, since this is beginning to change like this, it's like, somebody's pulling the rug from under your feet. you just
Yeah.
kind of, you're stunned, how it can happen to my country, to Canada, which I thought as a free nation. So yeah, and this is the reason, we are getting into all of this and trying to change things.
It's surprising we listen so closely to academics and fail to listen to people who have lived experience. I worked as a professor, and I can tell you directly, academics are wrong a lot because they grow up in a world that is just not connected in many ways to what's actually happening in the world. And that disconnect, in my opinion, has gotten wider and wider and wider as more people sort of embark on these academic streams from high school to bachelor's to master's to PhD and then living in a university. And that really, I think, limits their ability to do some kinds of research or understand things or problems. Someone like you who grew up in the USSR, or there are people from the Middle East or Asian countries that also came to Canada for freedom, and they grew up in countries where there was repression. And they are sounding the alarm in a number of ways. And I'm really surprised they don't get an awful lot of press or attention, because people who have lived experience are often the best ones to talk to and the first ones to see the patterns that are going to lead to the outcomes that we don't want. And so when they speak, we really should pay attention and listen, but we don't seem to be listening to them. Sorry, that's a motorcycle that just went by.
I'm sorry, I also had some background sounds. People came to mow my lawn. So anyway, but I was trying to mute it strategically when I had to.
Yeah.
So in
By
any
the way,
case, yeah, go ahead.
I love motorcycles. I have two of them. I've got a little scooter. I love scooters because when I lived in Asia, I drove a scooter every day. They're just a lot of fun. And then I've got a great big sport touring bike for my more faster trips.
We need to have our outlets. In my case, it's sailing. I have a sailboat. I have a power boat as well, just to have another one. And also, I actually recently got into this electric modes of transportation. I have an electrical scooter, but then I have decided to go and challenge myself. So I bought the electric skateboard. And
that looks, I've seen kids on those. They look like a lot of fun, but you have to have a good sense of balance, I think.
You do. This was the reason for me after 50, just try to get myself back a sense of balance, which I had as a kid or as a teenager. But we digress. So let's get to another topic here. And this is the mandatory vaccination. I think this is probably one of the biggest issues. It's not just the vaccination itself, but it's the limits which government puts, on the unvaccinated. The kind of campaign they run against the unvaccinated people's, the fear mongering, to be honest with you, the scaremongering. So what do you think about those policies, about what federal government has done already, or actually is going to come into power at the end of September, the requirement for all the federal employees to be vaccinated, and the limitations on the interprovincial travel, either by air or by train? And also, what is going on with this particular issue in Alberta? Are they following the footsteps of BC, or is it not the case yet?
Well, to speak to the first part of the question, I'll just say that they're flat out wrong. Forcing, and they're going to try and wiggle out of saying, well, we didn't really force you, we just said you can't do anything, you can't travel, you can't go to a restaurant, but we didn't actually tie you down. That's in a court of law that wouldn't hold up. When you put these kinds of restrictions on somebody, it is equivalent to forcing them. And I think if it went before judges, that would be the finding. It is forcing people, and to answer your question plainly, it's wrong. I don't think the science doesn't justify it. If this COVID was so bad that it was literally killing, millions of people, and it's like a race extinction type event, okay, then you might be justified, to take these kinds of steps. But it's nothing like that. And we've had flu injections in Canada every fall available to people, and it was always choice. Nobody was trying to force people to have the flu vaccines. It was suggested and recommended, but it was always up to you. The medical community, as I saw an interview with one of the doctors, I think it was a Dr. Morgan. I'd have to look up the name. It's posted on my website, electtom.ca, or on my Facebook page. But it was an interesting, intelligent discussion. As doctor basically said, they're not trained like this. Ethically, they have to tell people about any medical procedure, any medications, and then people can opt out. And that's the ethics of the medical community. It's really surprising to see them, violating these kinds of ethics. I don't think most of the medical community actually approves of this. I think that they're also kind of being forced along. I have friends in the medical field, and most of them feel very uncomfortable with what's happening. But they like their, they want to keep their jobs. They want to be able to feed their families. We have a lot of economic uncertainty, and so they will go along to get along. But when people are doing things and they're so uncomfortable about it, that's not a good sign that you're governing well or making good decisions.
Right, and that's the point, that there is many people who feel in medical community who feel very uncomfortable all of this. But as you said, they like to keep their job. They need to feed their children, feed their families, etc. So for them, they know if they're going to step against the establishment, this means they're going to eventually lose their license, lose their livelihood, etc. So very few people, like people who are retired, are coming out against all this. Like in your neck of the wood, there is a Dr. Hodkinson, who is a very well qualified doctor. He used to be the CEO for the lab. He is actually, I think, the head of the Canadian Pathology Association. And pathologists are some of the, well educated doctors, who come to the final conclusion of what happened there, etc. So in any case, he was very outspoken about it. Did you hear about this name, Dr. Hodkinson?
Yes, I have. Yeah, and
okay.
He's one of the brave ones. I think there's many more like him. They just don't have perhaps the bravery, or they don't have maybe the resources or something. They have to be very concerned. I mean, one of the things I like about the PPC party is they're very much interested in smaller government. And I think that's an important thing for democracy, because right now, I've heard the statistic, and I'm not sure the source, but like 1/3 of people get a paycheck from the government, or are in some way paid by government. And that seems to be increasing more and more. And if your livelihood is tied to the government, well, are you ever going to vote for smaller government? Are you ever going to vote for reduced government? Will you ever fight your government? It's a lot less likely. And it's kind of an insidious means in a democracy for government to have power over people. If they control your paycheck, you're not going to want to make too many waves or problems with them. And that's likely, a situation with a lot of healthcare people. That they have to fight their employer, and their employer might, there might be repercussions in their jobs and their income if they do so.
Absolutely, and a lot of this is going on in US. The payments out to the US citizens, even residents like myself, have been tremendous. I mean, last year I have received thousands of dollars in US government help just because, they felt that they had to go and in a way bribe the population. So right now, the biggest problem in US is that there is not enough people to fill the vacancies. Many people got the taste of not working, and you go and you see all these signs on the stores and businesses, help wanted, where you didn't see it before. So that's the case.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I've gotten some letters from people who want to ask me my opinion on universal basic income. And as a candidate, this is something funny. I get these form letters from like a dozen people in a day. And they're all asking, like, their wording's the exact same. So they're obviously coming from some organization. And I just can't take the time to reply to a dozen people, but I try to reply to at least one of them. And maybe I'll look at a video or something to reply. But I've gotten a bunch of these letters asking about, we want to support universal basic income. That's a radical, brand new social experiment. And I do have a master's degree in business and economics. And so this is a very radical way to run a national economy. I think what's happened in the US and Canada with this COVID, it's almost a little bit of a test of universal basic income. And like you said, the US has found that after they did it, a lot of people didn't want to go back to work. And now all of a sudden you have shortages in your
labor
sector.
Force. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's not a good thing for an economy.
I completely agree with you on this one and all the other issues, as a matter of fact. I have a couple of more questions. We already had the 30-minute time off from the beginning of this interview, so maybe another 10 minutes, before we wrap up, kind of make it more concise. And we'll try to come back to some of the other problems, if you don't mind, afterwards, after the election. So this, could be another way, for you to make known your opinion and your position. And you're a very well outspoken man with very defined opinions on many of the issues. So people, I'm sure, will be very interested in learning those.
Well, that's what the School of Hard Knocks does. You learn a lot.
Apparently the case. So mandatory masking. This is not a huge issue, I guess, for some of the people, but still, it's very symbolic. When people are being, put muzzles on their faces, etc., irregardless of the benefits of the harms of the masks, right? I think that especially it impacts children at school. If they're made to be in mask all day long for 8 hours, this is tremendous impact on their health. It's a deprivation of oxygen. It's kind of the environment that creates, by the mouse, which has loaded with bacteria, etc. And of course, it's also the emotional damage that kids are receiving, not seeing the emotions of the other people, of children and teachers, etc. So what do you think about this? Do you agree with this type of assessment, that it's not a good thing for kids and overall, or are you of different opinion?
Well, I have to say I do agree with you, and so this comes from experience also. So I worked in electronics industry where we had to work in special PPE equipment to avoid dust contaminations, and the masks were part of it. So at the time, we had studies and medical concerns about staff that worked in the laboratories and in the production lines where, they had to wear these masks all day. And so we had to give them breaks to get, breathe clean air.
Right.
And there was studies, of course, when we first started mandating masks that did talk about the fact that, and I know there were some doctors that were saying it's not good to wear masks all the time. So people have to take breaks. And I think for young people, it's particularly bad in terms of they're just getting so much carbon dioxide into their lungs. And when you have a developing body, that's probably not a good thing. The other factor you measure is just the social interaction, sort of developing social skills. I think, we talk about body language, and a big part of interacting socially is seeing the emotions on people's faces.
Right.
And when you cover their mouths, two things happen. One is you're no longer seeing those facial expressions, and I think that's limiting or having an effect on your ability to develop the communication skills that people would if they could see your full face. And I also find that when people speak in the masks, it accents their voices. The pronunciation of words and vowels becomes modified by the mask a little bit. I have more troubles understanding people. So I think that is also a factor that, affects communication. So overall, bad for health, bad for communication. I think you only want to wear them as little as possible. But I can understand, in Asia, where I was, when people got sick, they always wore a mask when they went out to protect
Right.
the people around them. So I can kind of understand that. I spent some time in a city called Chiang Mai in northern Thailand, and they have very, very bad dust problems. And you'd go for a couple months wearing a mask constantly. And this was actually one of the reasons I left that place, because I felt I don't want to live in a world or a country or an environment where I have to walk around wearing a mask all day. And that's what I had to do there because of the mini particles that were in the air when we had these farmers burning and putting a lot of smoke in the air. And now I come back to Canada and I'm seeing again, you have to wear a mask constantly, and that's not a good thing.
Okay, this is actually a very valuable opinion, especially taking into account your international experience. So we already touched a little bit upon the international aspects of all this. Perhaps we can come back to this in the later conversation. But one final thing I would like to ask you is about your local community. What's in it for them to vote for you, to vote for the PPC? What type of local issues would you highlight when you go into the House of Commons and kind of try to help the community out to solve some of the local problems?
Well, I think, my district is in Edmonton, the city of Edmonton. It's called Griesbach, and the city is in the province of Alberta. And Alberta has been a very successful province in many ways because we had a very strong oil industry, and oil was a very valuable commodity on the markets. And there's been a lot of restrictions, environmental controls on that. And so one of the big issues to get people to work is that we need to relax on those. So the PPC party is dedicated to using the federal powers of the Constitution to overrule provinces that try to block the use of pipelines, to get Alberta's oil into other international markets. More directly, people in Alberta and in Canada in general have been experiencing insane inflation for food, gasoline, and utilities. Those three have added thousands of dollars a year to people's expenditures. And for a lot of people on the edge of financial ruin, after losing their jobs with COVID and stuff, having to pay more for basics like groceries, gas, and utilities is really a hardship for them. And the PPC party has some direct and powerful solutions to solve all three of those. So first of all, the PPC party is going to get rid of the carbon tax. That would immediately reduce people's gasoline and utility bills. The PPC is also going to work with the Bank of Canada to reduce inflation. And having an economics background, I think their plan for this is very good. And so that would lower the grocery bills. The other thing the PPC will do probably is by getting rid of a lot of these mandates, they're going to open up the economy. Once the economy opens up, that's going to open up the supply chains. It's going to open up the productions again. Once those are open, we have more goods coming on the market. When you have more goods on the market, the price goes down. It's a supply and demand curve. It's economics 101. So the PPC has a plan that will directly benefit every single family in Canada, but especially the families in my district where a lot of people are, struggling financially. They can expect those costs that are really causing a hardship in their lives to go down with a PPC party being able to, make the legislation that this country needs.
Okay, thank you for your opinion. And so at this point, we already did about 40 minutes of the interview. So let's wrap up for today. I am going to wish you best of luck during this election. I'm going to wish best of luck to Canada to wisen up and vote PPC, because frankly, this is the only alternative, the only solution, as a matter of fact, that we have. So hopefully Canadians will vote responsibly. Let's do it this way. And let's connect after the election, regardless of the outcome. Let's connect, let's talk about, let's discuss what are the next steps, etc. And hopefully, more people will tune into this message.
Yeah, I agree, Konstantin. The best way to start solving a problem is to begin talking about it. And I think your channel and your work here is really invaluable for us, because we're not getting it from the mainstream media, unfortunately. I guess that's what happens when people pay you $600 million to narrate their story for them.
if you count CBC, it's actually $1.6 billion, because they got
it
a billion.
Is. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I'm shocked that actually got through without a huge outcry from the people.
Exactly, because that's a real bribery. I mean, if there is a bribery, that's what it is. It's clear enough. And so, unfortunately, but you see, it's about what we call something, not about what it really is. So in this case, they call it, yeah, it's normal. We have to support our media. Of course, yes.
I'll tell you something interesting. I mean, Asia's kind of infamous for corruption. And after I spent 12 years there, I came back to Canada, and I'll tell you, I feel there's more corruption in Western countries than there was in Asia. The corruption was legalized. It was organized, it was lobbyists. It was a lot of things going on. And the difference was in Asia, people, they knew there was corruption and they were against it and they wanted to fight it and they wanted to decrease it. And I was really shocked to see, these things going on in Canada, like bribing the media and stuff. And it's like nobody says a thing. And it's just all accepted and tolerated. And that worries me a lot about the future of this country and what our children will inherit.
I agree. So let's at least speak about it, like we said. Brenda, go ahead.
I did promise to talk about one of my personal platforms. So, with all this experience, I'm more diversity. So instead of working in math, physics, or management, I now work in the legal field. And that's because of my family law experience. And so one of my personal platforms is to work with the PPC party to make a party platform, but I think we need legislation for shared parenting, that when couples separate, the children should be shared between the parents, rebuttable with evidence, if there's really a problem, but I've seen family law just gut of this country.
Yeah, you got on mute for a while, but I think you're back now, so that's good. Okay, no, this is another big issue because frequently what's happening in courts, it's the one parent that gets a custody of a child, but to bring a child, you got to have both parents. This is the best outcome for a little person. So from this point of view, this is a very noble cause to pick up and actually to fight for.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually the area I work in now, is helping self-representing litigants to go into the court system, because lawyers are very expensive and access to justice is a problem in Canada. And I work on that. But ultimately, I mean, that's why I ran for office, is because you can't do much working with a broken system. To really fix the root cause problem, you have to get some authority, some power within the system, and then you can go to work on actually solving the problems at their root causes.
Right.
So, right now in my work, I'm working with a system that's got a lot of issues, and I help people to work with those issues the best that they can. But what I really want to do is solve the issues. And so that's why I made the transmission from what's called professional Mackenzie friend. And I'm the only one in Canada. So it's a very unique thing. I've had some professors contact me about it. It's mackenziefriend.ca if you want to learn a bit about it. But in Canada, we have this wonderful bit of, common law that allows a non-lawyer to help somebody to do a legal case. And so that's what I do. But, it's frustrating to me, having been a senior manager with authority and signing ability and budgets, who could fix problems, to now I have to kind of work within a broken process. And even though I can help people a lot with that system, that they can navigate it and do the best they can in it, I still am very much motivated to fix the problems. And that means running for office and getting into a position where I can actually do a lot more to solve the root level problems.
Right. Well, Tom, what can I tell you? Perhaps this should be one of the topics for us to discuss in the future, because this could be interesting to many, many Canadians. And the more people know about it, hopefully the more support your cause can garner. So from this point of view, let's talk about this in the future. I'm sure this is going to be a very interesting topic to discuss, and which is not very frequently touched upon by the mainstream media or anybody else for this matter. I didn't hear much about it.
Yeah, for such a huge problem, because most people have experienced it in one way or another. Either they've been in it or they know somebody who's been in it. It's one of the most expensive parts of our whole legal system. It's one that's most frustrating to the courts because it has a lot of self-representing litigants in it who can't afford lawyers, and the judges and the system have troubles dealing with them. So yeah, it's a huge problem, and it does not get the attention it needs. And so that's one of the things that I would personally bring as my personal platform. That's something I really want to bring both to the party and to the nation if I'm elected.
Exactly. So, Tom, you are a fascinating man. I'm happy we had a chance to connect and talk to you before the election. I hope it's going to have some positive influence in the number of people that are going to vote for you in this federal election. Again, best of luck, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, I think we will, Konstantin. I'm sure we haven't seen the last of each other. I predict some more discussions, and I'd love to know more about, what it was like in the USSR in the past.
Absolutely. I'm ready to talk about this as well. Absolutely, you bet. All right. Take care.
Yeah. Bye. Take care.